Welcome to Product Momentum, a community of thought leaders and learners coming together to celebrate the product people who are shaping our way ahead. Inspired by our most pressing questions and insightful guests, we'll explore the challenges you face and offer practical, hands-on guidance your team can implement today. This is Product Momentum. Here are your hosts, Sean Flaherty and Paul Gable.
Sean, this was an awesome episode. It's one of my favorite subjects, psychology.
Your favorite subject, something that somewhat terrifies me, psychology or behavior science. I was like, am I going to be down on a couch? Is she going to have a clipboard? Like, I was worried. But
Katie Dove,
but it was awesome.
She made it easy. She's such a smart, intelligent speaker, has such a grasp of the domain. Her speech was amazing today at Industry, and we were able to unpack a lot of her ideas. This is a great episode.
We threw some wild stuff at her, and she was right on the ball.
She's on it.
It was awesome.
Let's get after this.
Let's do it. Katie Dove is a managing director at Irrational Labs, where she helps companies like Google, Walmart, Microsoft, and LinkedIn solve for key outcomes like engagement or retention based on users' actual behavior rather than their stated intentions. She's an expert at creating transformative digital product experiences at scale using behaviorally informed approaches. Previously, Katie was a leader in Deloitte's digital human experience practice, a group focused on shifting traditional CX approaches to designs that elevate human connection and relationships. Katie's here at Industry helping product people understand behavioral science and how to amplify human value in products. Thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Your talk was awesome. Amplifying value, human value in products. I'm going to ask you to help unpack that a bit for our listeners. So what's human value in products and what does amplifying that look like?
Yeah, so maybe I'll just take a step back. I'm part of Irrational Labs, and we use behavioral science and psychology to help users and to help organizations drive user value by understanding how they can change behavior, whether it's increasing engagement, reducing churn, these types of things. And so when I'm talking about human value, I'm actually talking about what's created for the user in the moment of using a product or an experience online. And so I contrast this a little bit with economic value. So as one example, imagine you need a date for a wedding and you don't want to go alone. And so you text your friend and you're like, do you know anyone I should take? And they say Bob. Bob is or may be the right answer. He may be a great fit. That is the economic value, but human value is everything beyond that. It's unpacking the work your friend did to actually find the perfect fit for you, to make sure that they were available and free. And you do that in product and people will come back more. They'll be more loyal. They will increase their engagement.
Awesome.
One of the things from your talk I thought was profound was this hyper focus on getting the user of the product to have a sense of feeling known, like they're recognized, like they're a person. And, we know in human interactions how important that is. Tell us about how to do this in the context of a software product, because, we don't really think about software products as building relationships, but they do.
Yeah, that's true. So maybe I'll just give you an example of some of my favorites. So Duolingo is a product out there that's really changing the way that people learn languages. And one of the very first things they do is get to know you. So you're going from an empty state, so basically knowing nothing about the user, to knowing quite a lot by they're going through their onboarding quiz. And that onboarding quiz does two things. One, they're asking you about your preferences. How do you want to use the app? How much time do you want to dedicate to language learning every day, which is getting you to understand the value of the product. But it's also increasing my expectation that things will be tailored to my needs. And they really are building this mental model of how I can get more out of the experience. So that's one example. You see this a lot with companies like Noom, where they're also doing these kind of onboarding quizzes and getting you involved and invested in the personalized experience on the back end.
Awesome. You said you threw a statistic out there, some research around how it's about 2 times more important that the consumer feels known than it is that they know you.
Yeah.
That was profound. It's a profound way to think about it.
Yeah, and so that's really interesting. So there's this work from Juliana Schroeder. She's a researcher at Berkeley, and she studies how people are able to form successful relationships. And basically what she showed is exactly this. It's like, we have a relationship now, Sean. I know you, you know me. I care a lot more about how you know me than about me knowing you.
Yeah.
I mean, what's interesting about this is they carried out their research actually on dating apps. And people underestimate this, right? How important it is to express that you want to get to know the other person. People always talk about how much they want other people to know them. And this is a big misstep in terms of driving relationship value. You actually want to get to know the other person, or at least state that you will get to know the
And
other.
demonstrate it.
Yeah,
Not just
demonstrate.
say it, but actually do
Take
it.
the time.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think this hyper focus on behavior too is like it's a pet like project of mine. Like I've always said, like when you build software products, especially, like every micro experience matters. Like every micro experience is a move, whether people realize it or not, up and down what I call the relationship ladder. You're either moving towards a stronger relationship or you're moving away from it. It's an opportunity, and we should treat it like an honor. You know, I
Yeah.
love that.
You see those behaviors that help you move up that relationship ladder, right? Those are the ones you want to double down on, right?
Yeah.
But
But-
you can overdo it. You talked about the target example. Tell the audience about the target example.
Yeah, but one of the things you could do is unpack the effort. But of course, the target example is interesting, and it's kind of a stretch for product. It's more about advertising and really giving people personalized offers based on your past shopping behaviors with an organization, in this case, Target. And what Target did back in 2022 was inadvertently out pregnant customers by sending them highly personalized offers for baby products. The problem was these offers went to women who were either unaware themselves that they were pregnant or hadn't yet shared that news with friends and family. But what Target was trying to do was give you more of what you wanted and needed based on those past behavioral cues.
Predictably.
Exactly. And so even though it may have had this, is just a callback to human value versus economic value, even though it had this great economic value, it was actually a good fit and good match for your needs. What the consumer just wasn't bought in on the how. And so it came across as really creepy because it was unexplained, because they didn't get that you bought in on how they were actually going about this process of personalization.
The miss, as I read it from your talk, is about not really understanding the holistic psychology of the user, right?
That's right.
And every attempt to use data to over-index on prediction, you just got to be careful with that. You got to really think it through.
Yeah. And so Irrational Labs, when we work with clients, the Googles, the Intuits of the world, we have this 3B model of behavior change. And what the 3B model says is, okay, if you want to drive a particular behavior, let's say in this case, engagement with an offer, you want to first go through a behavioral audit, a diagnostic process where you say, okay, what are all of the steps in getting to that key behavior? If you want them to engage with the app, you want them to sign in with the app, what are all the things that have to happen? One, the app has to be top of mind. They need to get a cue, some sort of trigger. And so we map out all of those steps that need to be taken and layer on the psychology. And so that's where the second and third B's come in. What are the psychological barriers that get in the way? In this case, the consumer ultimately wasn't bought in. This was a little bit of a shock because they had no clue where this recommendation was coming from, and they themselves may have had some level of information aversion, kind of doubting what was the course of what was going on. And then you want to increase the benefits for someone to take that action, which is the third B.
Yeah. How do you strike that balance between like personalization and privacy concerns? How do you know, are there ways to know like maybe we're going too far?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think my solve for this is ask more questions. When you're not sure, by asking questions, you're doing two things, right? You're giving people the opportunity to have some agency in the process. They get the ability to help, but they are also making it explicit what you're collecting and why. And so asking questions is a great way to get to that point. Another way is like making it very transparent on how these things will be used. So there's this concept of operational transparency. Again, kind of going back to this concept of maximizing the effort you're taking on behalf of the user. One way to allow them or to enable them to appreciate how much effort's being taken is by telling them how you'll use it. So it has a two-prong effect in terms of like maximizing how valuable the experience is, but also making sure they're explicitly aware of how you're going to use that data.
Okay. Cool.
So let's unpack that concept of operational transparency in terms of reducing effort, Sean said earlier.
In terms of reducing effort.
Yeah, or not reducing effort, but demonstrating the effort that you put into. Because you'd mentioned that too, like unpacking the effort, like showing the consumer.
Okay. Yeah, great question. So imagine you locked yourself out of your house, right?
Yeah.
You call a locksmith, they come over to your house. 2 minutes later, he's through the door. He says, That'll be $200.
Huh.
Versus they're sweating profusely. They're there for hours. And after they're fully done and you're back in the house, they're like, man, okay, $200.
Here's a tip.
Which one do you feel better about? You feel better about effort. Just in fact, like you're paying for incompetence. But the difference is, like, we pay for effort. We value when people are working hard on our behalf. So it's not just about the optimal thing you give people, but it's making clear all of the effort that went into delivering that experience.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of components there. One is you're showing the customer, you're clearly demonstrating to the customer that you care about them. Like, we did this work because we care about you.
That's right.
And the second part is you're kind of educating the customer a little bit too, if you're doing it, I think, if you're doing it right. So this operational transparency concept plays on the human intrinsic need for competence and for self-esteem, right? So like if you can teach them a little something along the way while you're showing them how much work you're putting in, I think it's like has a twofold impact, right?
It does. And I know you're a fan of self-determination, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
throw
it
that
does
out
have
there.
this twofold effect. So basically, this first one around competence and feeling like you've contributed to something. Dan Ariely is a famed behavioral economist, and he did an experiment where, like, he had 3 different research groups. One who they would take this test and they would bring the test to the front, the person would collect it, and you would get paid for taking the test. And that was the control. And I had another one where they brought the test up. The examiner read all of the answers, then paid them for their work, and then shredded the test. And then this last condition, when you brought the test up and they immediately shredded, they didn't even look at it. Which one do you think persisted through this task the longest? Exactly. People want to feel like they're making progress, that they're building some sort of competency. And so, yeah, I think
And that their work matters.
and that their work
Like
matters.
their knowledge matters, their work matters.
And so, yeah, and so kind of to this point, it's not just about the effort that the product is taking on the user's behalf, but it can actually be really powerful to get the user to take effort.
Make an
It's
investment.
the IKEA effect. It's like we value things more when we contribute to the process.
Yeah, that's, to your point about asking some questions along the way, you build this relationship because you've asked a question. Now, if you're doing something with the answer and you're demonstrating that you're using that answer, that's sort of the IKEA effect. You're doing the work with me. You're creating these little experience rungs in the ladder, right?
Yeah, you're contributing. Yeah.
Yeah, Nir Eyal talked about this in his book, Hooked. I'm sure you've read all his work too. He was on our podcast a couple of years ago.
The PubSec books are really fun. They're like a little teaser, and if you dig beneath the covers and really understand the mechanics of how these things work and appreciate the psychology of how people make decisions, you can drive a lot more value for your users.
What are some tools that like people could start using right now to start collecting some of this like behavior data from their users? Like, and I'm also wondering, is there some benefit to being like very explicit about like, hey, we are going to collect data about you for X, right? Or are there kind of like more subtle ways that still have value?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the first thing I would say is everybody should be doing some sort of behavioral diagnostic work. You should understand actually not only all the steps that are taken by your user, but the decisions that they have to make along the way. Especially if you're working in health and finance, often the patient or the user of fintech tools, they're actually not the only stakeholder that needs to be involved in certain decisions. And so I think that's the first thing, that if you are really trying to empathize with your user and appreciate the work that they need to do, that's step one. And then behavioral science is about validating, and really behavioral design is the translation of behavioral science into applied design. And so a lot of what you want to be doing is taking these cues for how we make decisions in kind of this predictably rational kind of way, and in actually testing and validating those things are still true in product. And so just because something works in a controlled environment in an academic setting doesn't necessarily mean it'll translate. You can build a pretty powerful hunch about what will work in any given context, but ultimately you want to get into this routine of testing and validating.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
What are
Experimentation.
we talked about the Target example. Are there other like clear-cut examples of like somebody who tried to do this in product that really backfired, right?
Yeah, it's a good question. So the only thing you don't want to do in personalization is be blatantly wrong. And there are lots of ways to avoid that. But there are also leaders that we think of every day from a personalization perspective. Like I would think of Amazon as a leader. And yet If you buy a chef's knife, what's the next thing you get recommended? Another chef's knife. How is that possible? How many of these do I need in my kitchen? And yet there are these kind of things that they could deduce in terms of use cases. This is why we don't want to actually seed everything to Gen AI for making a decision. There is some level of hypothesis-based personalization that is important here. I think the other most common example of something that just doesn't work is when it's too effortful on behalf of the user. So if I think about personal budgeting apps, if I think about nutrition tracking apps, these things are effortful. You go through the process, but you create a lot of very personalized rules that ultimately are very difficult to remember. From a working memory perspective, we can hold 3 to 5 things in our memory at any given time, and you're asking them to remember specifically what they want to spend on utilities, on those are larger categories, but some of these get down to like your entertainment spend each given month. And so how do you think about like making it simple and easy for the user to remember so that they can actually do these things? And so I think actually budgeting apps and nutrition apps, unfortunately, the reason we don't stick with them, we set up the Mint account once, RIP Mint, you set up the Mint account once and never go back, is because it's too complex, it's too effortful.
Yeah, and I did some work with Dictionary.com years ago. We were trying to figure out how much information can we gather to personalize. It's annoying when you're asking too many questions, so you'll lose people along the way. And I loved your concept of kind of like dripping it maybe and tweaking it along the way. Like ask a question, use the answer so people get the benefit, and then ask another question a little later on. Like build the relationship over time by asking questions, using it. And I loved your concept of callbacks.
Yeah.
Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so a callback is just basically a reference to something someone's already said to you, acknowledged about you. And callbacks are really powerful because they say to the recipient that I have a mental model for the types of things that you care about. And so you can create callbacks in product by acknowledging things they've done before on the platform. If you think about Nike and their fitness app, or if you think about ClassPass, the first thing they recommend to you is actually the class you just took. And why is that? Because past behavior predicts future behavior, but it's also a callback to something you've already said you care about.
Yeah, to me, it's like you're demonstrating that you're listening.
Yeah.
So you're concerned, you're listening, you're paying attention, and you're adding that value back
Yeah.
into the relationship.
And the real magic comes when you've built that level of trust. And you say, I do recognize you. And then you can get them to start to edge a little bit out of their comfort zone by kind of giving these recommendations that are similar to things they've told you they cared about and that you've acknowledged in the application.
Yeah.
But now they're more willing to try.
Yeah, I think that applies. I mean, even outside of your users, that's just the way you should operate in life, right? What do you say, Sean? Like
I don't think it's different. Like
connections before commerce or something like
connection before content. Like if you're gonna step into a meeting, I always tell that to my people. Like connection before content. Like don't jump right into the work. Like talk a little bit, get to know each other, make sure you know how their day's going before you get into the work, because relationships are how we produce creativity.
Yeah.
Every day. Like that's
And I think you did that by showing us your Spotify playlist, like at the start of your talk, right?
What do you think about it with, again, the restaurant example is just a really nice one because you never sit down in a restaurant and they point to the most expensive thing on the menu and you're like, yes, I'll buy that. They have to get to know you. They can do some lovely things like actually saying, oh, actually, this isn't that good today. I'd actually recommend this other thing. These things build trust. Asking people about their preferences, it builds this perception of responsiveness to my needs.
Before this, we were talking about the Ritz-Carlton example too. So that's another perfect example. Like that's a hotel that spends a lot of energy understanding who the customer is, what they care about, and they teach their staff. I mean, like they take the next step. They go one step further. And I don't think software is any different. Like I think we have this opportunity. And like I said earlier, like each experience we get to produce for our customers, our users in the world, like it's an honor to have that time from them. So like, let's treat it that way.
Yeah.
Like let's figure out how to make this experience valuable.
Yeah.
I love that.
That's right.
Yeah.
You spoke a lot about trust, and trust is like our first rung on our relationship ladder, right? So we want to work from trust to loyalty to advocacy. And I think a lot of what you're talking about is how we actually creating that momentum upward, getting to advocacy, so that I'm helping, as a user, I'm invested in actually like the success of the product, right?
Yeah.
I want it to do well. I want to tell other people about it.
I think that's something a lot of product leaders miss, is that it's reciprocal. Like if you want those relationships, you have to invest in it, It goes both ways all the way up the ladder for sure.
For sure. And I imagine this has been a theme of today too, is like it's not just like, I want you to engage more with my product. Why would you actually engage with my product? And can you walk in their shoes, dog through the product, and go through that process?
Yeah. Tell us about idiosyncratic fit. You introduced that distinction in your talk, and I loved it.
Yeah. So do you remember, I don't know if they still do this, but they used to put toys in cereal boxes.
Yeah, of course. I think I still have some. McDonald's too, and the Happy Meals.
Sometimes we as human beings hate that because we feel like we're paying for the additional thing, not the thing we want. And that is basically the concept of idiosyncratic fit. When we feel like there's a unique alignment between the product and our individual needs and preferences, then that offer is much more attractive.
I love that.
When it includes all the things we want and none of the things we don't want, like the Tony the Tiger bowl, or like the spoons back in the day when there was like Bug's Life. They used to put spoons. We had all of the spoons. And so some people will like that, but some people will outright reject that offer because they feel like they're paying for things that they don't want. We see this in product too, when apps try to make you feel like you're getting a lot of value by showing you all the different things that are included. And sometimes that makes people feel like they're paying for things they don't need. And so really understanding your customers' needs, and if you want to include those things, there are opportunities. Like I think about this with Adobe. Adobe has like 25 different packages, or 25 different feature enhancements in their Photoshop shoot. If you're coming for Photoshop, do you want all the other things? I don't know. But you could frame these as bonuses or as additional to the thing that they're paying for, so they don't feel like they're losing out on that value.
Yeah, and again, it always boils down to knowing your customer, like really knowing your customer well and understanding the psychology of users. So I love that. Well, this has been awesome. What are you reading these days?
What am I reading these days? Great question. I'm actually reading a lot of fiction, so nothing immediately applicable to all of you, but just read the book Subtract, which is really interesting. Have you read Subtract?
I have, yeah.
Okay, I was gonna say that's the last functional book I've read, which is about we systematically neglect what we can take away from an experience to actually drive appreciation and value in those experiences. So that's a really great book.
Occam's Razor. It's a beautiful book. Really enjoyed it.
How do you define innovation? This is something we ask all of our podcast guests.
How do I define innovation? That's a good question. I've never been asked this question. I should have known it was coming. Yeah, good question. I think innovation happens when you unlock latent demand. You find a better way to do something that where people have been circumventing a traditional process or a design or a product to get to the answer they need. If you can unlock that latent demand, I think that's true innovation.
That's a unique answer. I love it. Okay. Well, thank you for joining us today, Katie. This is a great conversation. I can't wait to share it with the audience. Yeah.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, that's it for today. In line with our goals of transparency and listening, we really want to hear from you. Sean and I are committed to reading every piece of feedback that we get, so please leave a comment or a rating wherever you're listening to this podcast. Not only does it help us continue to improve, but it also helps the show climb up the rankings so that we can help other listeners move, touch, and inspire the world just like you're doing. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next episode.